All right, hello everyone, this is My Two Cents, and today I would like to address the question, do conservatives, libertarians, and people on the right in general care about the poor? Now this question came up in my mind because of a comment that I saw on another YouTube video earlier today. It was a video that was put out by Lodworth Crowder addressing the question, what is the difference between a right and a privilege? And it's a great video, I encourage you all to check it out. But on the video was this comment. The comment comes from someone named Andrew Harrison, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I essentially want to zoom in on the second part. Essentially, what Crowder is saying here is that I don't give a shit about anyone else, i.e. taxpayer money, going to the others less fortunate, but if we need to build a wall to protect the community, that's fine. The double standards are insane. Now, I certainly could talk about whether or not using taxpayer funds to provide a service for the American people, such as a wall to protect them, or just giving taxpayer funds to people who have not done anything to earn said funds, whether or not those things are truly equivalent. Certainly we could talk about that, but I just want to zoom in specifically on the claim that people like Crowder and people on the right just don't care about the poor. It's something you hear all the time from liberals. You know, you guys on the right, you're just a bunch of stingy rich people. You don't care about the poor. You don't need all that extra money you have. You need to start paying your fair share because there are people out there that are really suffering. They really need that money. Yeah, we've heard it all before. But is it really true? Is it true that, you know, everyone on the left just cares so much about the poor? They want the government to take more money and give it to the poor, and everyone on the right is just stingy and doesn't care about the poor at all. I think this kind of rhetoric is totally unhelpful in these kinds of discussions. I believe in something called the principle of charity. In other words, if I'm having a conversation with someone who has an opinion different than my own, I try to give them the benefit of the doubt and assume that they hold the view they do because they genuinely think it's what's best, not because they have some kind of hidden agenda, unless I see ample evidence that they actually are lying and trying to put up a screen and they really do have a hidden agenda for what they support. But that's only in certain circumstances can I do that. If I'm talking to someone I've just met, I'll try to, give you enough charity that I'll at least assume that you have good intentions, whether or not what you believe is real, I think is really right or not. So I'm at least going to give the benefit of the doubt and say there are probably a lot of people on both the left and the right that care about the poor. What we disagree on is what is actually going to help the poor. So I think the real question we need to answer is, what is more helpful to the poor? Free market capitalism or an increasingly generous welfare state moving more and more towards socialism, where the government basically takes money from people who have worked to earn it and gives it to people who did not earn it? And which of those two things really helps the poor? And there's, in fact, a great deal of empirical data on this. Well, historically, we know that the so-called war on poverty that was put in place by Lyndon Johnson began in 1964, and it was essentially a wealth transfer. I mean, obviously it's more sophisticated than that, but it's essentially a wealth transfer from the rich to the poor. Basically, a movement to start increasing public welfare programs like food stamps and others to basically take taxpayer money and give it to the poor. Well, and what was originally the purpose of the war on poverty? Well, there's a great book that covers this subject, among other things, but by the famed economist Thomas Sowell, who, in his book, The Vision of the Anointed, chapter 2, talks about the war on poverty and, what it was supposed to do and what it actually did. And he quotes here John F. Kennedy, who said that public welfare, in short, must be more than a salvage operation, picking up the debris from the wreckage of human lives. Its emphasis must be directed increasingly towards prevention and rehabilitation, on reducing not only the long-range cost in budgetary terms, but the long-range cost in human terms as well. And he goes on to quote from a New York Times editorial that read, President Kennedy's welfare message to Congress yesterday stems from a recognition that no lasting solution to the problem can be bought with a relief check. Financial help to the needy must be supplemented by a vastly expanded range of professional and community services. Their aim, to keep men, women, and children from having to rely on public assistance by making them useful, creative citizens. The President does not pretend it will be cheap to provide the needed building and staff, facilities, and rehabilitation allowances. The initial cost will actually be greater than the mere continuation of handouts. The dividends will come in the restoration of individual dignity and in the long-run reduction of the need for government help. Okay, so as early as 1962, when President Kennedy is talking about increasing welfare programs, it seems people recognize that just handing out money is not going to solve the problem unless we actually reduce the number of poor people. And if just giving people enough money to get by, well, as the old proverb goes, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. In other words, if you give a man one meal, it's just one meal. If you teach him to obtain his own meals, well, then you don't have to keep helping him. But the question then becomes, if that is what the war on poverty was supposed to do, but through welfare programs actually decrease poverty, what in fact happened? Well, take a look at this chart from the Heritage Foundation. Pretty much the poverty level in America had already been decreasing, but come 1964, although it decreased a little bit, it has pretty much stayed steady all the way through 2012. So, in other words, it has abjectly failed to do what it was supposed to do. Later on in that same chapter of The Vision of the Anointed, Thomas Sowell goes on to explain, despite initial claims that various government services would lead to reduced federal outlays on welfare programs as more people became self-sufficient, the very opposite happened. The number of people receiving public assistance more than doubled from 1960 to 1977. The dollar value of public housing rose nearly fivefold in a decade, and the amount spent on food stamps rose more than tenfold. All government-provided in-kind benefits increased about eightfold from 1965 to 1969, and more than 20-fold by 1974. Federal spending on such social welfare programs not only rose in dollar terms and in real terms, but also a percentage of the nation's gross national product, going from 8% of GNP in 1960 to 16% in 1974. And what exactly happened when the war on poverty didn't create the outcome that it was supposed to? Well, Thomas Sowell, again, documents very well what happened, but he puts in one particular quote from a Professor Sheldon Danziger from the University of Wisconsin, who basically just asserted that, the poverty rates have stayed consistent, but I think they would have been even worse if they hadn't instituted the war on poverty, despite the fact the poverty line had already been decreasing. He said, I think we'd have poverty rates over 25%. And I like this quote from Thomas Sowell. He says, there is no possible reply to these heads I win and tails you lose assertions, except to note that they would justify any policy on any subject anywhere, regardless of its empirically observed consequences. So, back to the question, do people on the right not care about the poor? No, it's not that we don't care about the poor, it's that we don't think that welfare actually helps the poor. It merely, giving people handouts just keeps them in a situation where they are now dependent on the government and they require more and more money to be transferred from the rich to the poor. I mean, think about it. Given what's human nature to have to work hard for what you earn, or if someone's just willing to give you something for nothing, to take that. I mean, I don't think the question should be very hard, and that's why socialism always fails. The more a country moves towards socialism, the more money you take from the people who are actually earning, the less and less motivation they're going to have to even work or earn, because if they see their neighbors just doing nothing and receiving their money that they worked for, in turn, I mean, why should they keep working? Now, just to make a point, I absolutely support people choosing to give their own money to charity or directly to people who are in need. I think if you have the ability to help someone in need and you believe, if your friend comes to you and says, hey, look, man, I'm really struggling right now. If you could just give me $1,000, I think it would really help me get through a rough spot, and I could pay you back. Or, even if they don't say they're going to pay you back, just they're asking for your help and you think you can help them and you want to do that, that's great. I am not opposed to charity. What I am opposed to is forced charity, where the government takes your money by force and gives it to people who haven't earned it, whether you like it or not. And this leads me to take a look at this article. It was an opinion piece posted in the leftist New York Times back in 2008, but it was written by a liberal who basically says he's unhappy with the fact that it seems that liberals are not as generous as conservatives. So what does he say? He says, this holiday season, it is a time to examine who's been naughty and who's been nice, but I'm unhappy with my findings. The problem is this: we liberals are personally stingy. Liberals show tremendous compassion in pushing for generous government spending to help the neediest people at home and abroad, yet when it comes to individual contributions to charitable causes, liberals are cheapskates. Arthur Brooks, the author of a book on donors to charity, Who Really Cares, cites data that households headed by conservatives give 30% more to charity than households headed by liberals. A study by Google found an even greater disproportion. Average annual contributions reported by conservatives were almost double those of liberals. Now, I'm sure there's probably some liberals out there that are going to want to dispute whether or not the claims in this op-ed are true, but I mean, I think it resonates, everybody who reads that, it should resonate with you immediately that it is very easy to volunteer other people's money for a good cause, but are you willing to volunteer your own money for a good cause. And I think if you're not, then you should stop and question why you're so gung-ho about spending other people's money, but you're unwilling to spend your own. Are you really quite so passionate about helping the poor? Anyways, that is my 2 cents. Take it for what it's worth.